Thank you so much for joining us today on Connect and Collaborate, where we come together each business day to connect with Colorado Business Roundtable's business and industry partners. This week, our focus is on transportation. And so we are connecting with lots of the Colorado Department of Transportation people, CDOT, as we lovingly call it. We know that you guys have a ton of acronyms that you love to use.
We do.
And today we have with us Tamara Rollison, and she is the communications manager for the Denver region. And Tamara is going to talk with us about the I-25 Gap project. I'm very excited to learn about this. I drive from South Denver to Colorado Springs all the time. And so there's a gap there that
That's right.
we need to focus on. So if you want to go ahead and give us an overview of what this project entails.
I'll tell you a little bit about the gap and why it's called the gap.
Oh, thank you.
So from I-25 from South Denver to North Colorado Springs, much of that has been improved, but there is a section in the middle of that. It's about 18 miles. It still looks the same way it did the day the road opened, which was a very long time ago,
Oh, no.
nearly 60 years ago.
Oh, my goodness.
So that section of the gap is 2 lanes in each direction. It certainly served its purpose for a very long time,
Yeah.
but over the years, as you know, especially very recently, in the last few years, the population has skyrocketed
Oh, yeah.
along the Front Range, and comes with that a lot of good things, but some things, you have more people, you have more cars, you have less pavement in which those cars can travel on. And so what has happened, there's been an explosion of congestion on this section
Okay.
of the gap. So, and we'll get into this more later in the program, but as a result of a lot of studies and a lot of outreach by CDOT and working with localities along the Front Range, we determined that something needs to be done about this section, and a main piece to that equation is funding had to be identified. So, what we're moving forward on is CDOT is on a fast track to improve this 18-mile section of I-25, which we call the gap, by widening it by
Okay.
1 lane in each direction.
That's amazing. That already sounds amazing.
That will help. That will help immensely, and also by expanding the shoulders to the inside
Okay.
and to the outside. And this is very important because if you drive the gap, you will notice that the shoulders are very narrow.
Yes.
So if you have a crash or if there's some kind of incident on the roadway, there just is not the safe room to be able to maneuver vehicles around.
Yeah.
And so if you have an incident and if you have a crash, and if emergency personnel have to shut down a lane for each minute an accident causes, it causes about 4 minutes of delay.
Right.
So that is a main reason for backups that you may see on the gap. So by widening the shoulders, that will help quite a bit to be able to get some of these disabled vehicles off the road so the rest of the traffic can flow. Also, improvements include better wildlife crossings. The gap goes through some absolutely beautiful landscape.
Yes, it does.
It really does, between Colorado Springs and Denver, and 13 miles of that is why it's going through a wildlife area.
Yeah.
But the downside of that is a lot of crashes are caused by deer and other animals crossing the road, and there's crashes, and so something needs to be done as far as improving those crossings as well too. There will be some other improvements as well with lighting and technology and signage and that kind of thing, but those are the main things. Plus the road itself, we won't be able to rebuild the road. And by what I mean by that, I believe we did that on US 36. That's when you get in there and you do a complete facelift. You just dig up the whole road and you put down a new foundation, you put down a whole new surface. But what we will be doing is we'll resurface the pavement, and so when it's done, it's going to feel like a new roadway. It's going to be a much more comfortable drive. So that's where we're headed.
Okay, fantastic. I'm very excited about that. So what kind of schedule with this are we looking at? When I know that we're still waiting on a little bit of funding there, but do we have any hopes for a start date at all?
Well, CDOT does have the funding to complete the environmental analysis. It has the funding to do pre-construction work, and what's involved with that is we're in another phase of our environmental study, so we're doing that right now, and we're also doing some design work as well too. so that by the end of next year, around November of next year, we will be shovel ready. And what that means is we will be ready to build this project.
Fantastic.
We'll be ready. Now, there's a caveat to that we have to have all the funding in line to be able to start construction. We have identified the funding sources, but there are still some, particularly from the federal funding, there's a federal funding component that we still don't have in place.
Okay.
But we are moving ahead. We're moving ahead.
Fantastic. We'll get more into the details on the funding later on. But I did want to ask, this environmental study, what all goes into that?
It is quite extensive.
Yeah.
We started the study, which is called a PEL. That's another one of our lovely acronyms. I usually don't use that in a public setting because it even confuses me to a certain point. But I even have to look them up sometimes. That's a planning environmental linkages study.
Okay.
So that's what a PEL is.
All right.
So we started that about a year ago. And what that does is through that study, we take a really hard look in the corridor, but what we looked at first was the entire I-25 corridor, about 32 miles or so, from the Castle Rock area all the way to Monument, about 32 miles. We looked at the corridor, established what the needs are, established what the potential solutions would be to improve that corridor, and that involves a lot of traffic analysis, traffic modeling, engineering kind of work. It also involves public involvement, and it gives us an opportunity to establish relationships along the corridor with our regional and local partners because they are integral to what we do, and the public is very, very central to what we do.
Yeah.
We certainly want to know what they think is important. We want to hear from motorists who drive that stretch of roadway every day to help us identify what are the key needs so that we can figure out what are the best solutions to meet those key needs based on the funding that we have.
Wonderful. I love that. When we come back, we're going to talk more about the I-25 gap. Stay with us here on Connect and Collaborate. Thank you so much for staying with us today on Connect and Collaborate. I'm Alex Hopkins, taking over for Tammy Schaefer, and I have with us today Tamara Rollison from the Colorado Department of Transportation. We've had somebody on from CDOT all week, and she is the communications manager for the Denver region, and we're talking the I-25 gap project. And again, that's that 18-mile stretch on South I-25 between Monument and Castle Rock.
You're becoming an expert on this.
I'm trying.
Absolutely. You got it.
So we're going to talk a little bit about the characteristics of the corridor. Yeah, so I'm going to let Tamara take it away.
So if you can imagine, this stretch of I-25, it was built in the late 50s and opened in the early 60s. I'm not quite sure exactly when it was opened, but about the time when President Kennedy was our president.
Wow.
So just imagine what life was like in Colorado back then. It was a much smaller place.
Much quieter, I'm sure. Way less traffic.
Right?
Yeah.
And imagine what I-25 must have looked like at that time when it opened.
Yeah.
Well, it hasn't grown. While the population has grown, while Colorado has grown, just think of the changes in our vehicles and the way we travel during that time.
Right.
If you think. But yet, that section of I-25 has remained the same.
Wow.
So keep that into perspective. And I think there is a very large consensus with the localities along the corridor, Colorado Springs and Denver, that something needs to be done. We do need to improve this section of the gap. To give you an idea, right now, the average daily traffic volume, ADT, another one of our wonderful acronyms, but in plain English, between 77,000 and 86,000 cars drive on that section of I-25 every day.
Every day.
It's an average. So on an average day, about that many cars, up to 86,000 cars, travel that section of the gap every day.
That's
So it's a lot.
It is a lot.
Now, to compare that to some of our ADT, the average daily traffic volume in the metro area of Denver, it's much, much, much more.
Right.
But that is a lot for that section of gap, and I can tell you, it wasn't that much. I mean, not nearly as many cars traveled on the gap when it opened.
Yeah.
Right around the time I was born, okay?
Absolutely.
Many years ago. So that just gives you an idea of the age of the interstate. And it really is a challenge that we're having on our roadway system across the country because our interstate system was built around that time.
Yeah.
Our infrastructure is deteriorating all at the same time.
Yeah.
And so when you don't put the proper investment into it, it is just like constantly keeping up with the house that's falling apart.
Right,
And
the money pit, if you will.
It really is. And so that's a challenge, I think, for every DOT. It certainly is a challenge for CDOT. That is for sure. But that just gives you a little bit of background about the gap. And as I said earlier, it goes mainly, it's in an area, it's in between, it's in sort of a quiet type of area with beautiful wildlife.
Yeah.
It's predominantly in a rural area. And at one time it was pretty much rural traffic that used it. But what has happened though, and one thing you also have to remember, is that this stretch of I-25, it connects the two largest employment centers in the state, and that's Colorado Springs and Denver.
Right.
And you have commuters traveling between Denver and Colorado Springs. You have commerce, you have the military, and think of you have commerce from one stretch of the country to the other.
Right.
Also using I-25.
Yeah.
It really is the lifeline, not only for Colorado, but really for the country when you think about it.
Yeah.
And you've got this 2-lane section. It's 2 lanes in each direction. Nothing really has been done to it significantly. Obviously, there's been upkeep and repaving and that kind of thing, but nothing really significantly has been done to it in that time.
Right.
So that gives you a little bit of an idea. There are about 6 interchanges along that section of the gap, and to give you an idea of the population growth on a broader scale, we expect the population in Colorado to double over the next couple of decades, and so the traffic is going to our roads are going to have to keep up with the increasing vehicles, and that is going to put a lot of pressure on the gap as well too.
Absolutely.
Another thing is that I-25 in general, it connects 80% of Colorado's 5.5 million residents. So it's a very important stretch of roadway that needs improvement. And so when we are in our environmental phase, we look at the history of the gap. We look at the towns that are along the gap and how it benefits them. We look at how it moves commerce. We look at the role that this section of roadway is going to play well into the future and what we can do to make sure it's going to continue to be a vital link.
Yeah, putting it all into perspective, and this, from what I understand, this was an urgent need that we needed to get to, right? This is something that's very important to CDOT to take care of.
Well, another thing to keep in mind too is the safety aspect. We have unfortunately had a lot of crashes on I-25, mainly because you have too many people traveling on the road.
Right.
During the peak travel times, people are following too closely. It doesn't take much to block the lanes. When you have a tractor trailer jackknifing, you can cause delays that last for a very long time. And because of that, between the years of 2011 and 2015, there were 1,800 crashes on the gap. Of those crashes, there were over 600 injuries and 5 fatalities. So that, I would say, is probably the paramount reason why improvements are needed on the gap, simply to save lives.
Absolutely.
To have a safer infrastructure out there. CDOT's done everything that it can with the resources that it has to keep it as safe as possible. But there's a point in which it just needs to be widened. Yeah. It needs to be improved, and it needs to be repaved so that it's safer for people who use that stretch of roadway every day.
Right. Well, and speaking of safety, we did talk a little bit about the nature aspect of it, right? There are lots of wildlife that can cause those accidents as well. I was checking out the website earlier. It's codot.gov.
That's right.
Yeah. And one of the things I noticed is that you guys worked with the Parks and Wildlife.
We do. Yeah.
And you set up 12 trail cameras?
We set up cameras.
Yeah.
They're very interesting so that we can study the patterns of wildlife and what's working. We do have some bridges that go underneath. I guess I would call them animal tunnels. We have that's what they look like to me. I've actually walked through them before, but we have these animal tunnels that go underneath the road. And with some of them, we've had some issue when the deer if they can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, they may not use the tunnel. They're not quite sure about that.
Well, that's fair.
So what they may do is they'll go across the road, and then that's not good because then you have a safety situation in which they could cross the road. They may not look both directions. They're not always known to do that, and then you have a crash. So we're looking at what can we do to improve wildlife crossings to make them safer, so that we can protect the wildlife and the cars from each other.
Right.
So that's very important to us too. But yes, we do have animal cams. They're very interesting to look at. We've got lots of lots of animal selfies. They go right up to the cameras. They love looking at themselves in the cameras. So.
How funny. Yeah, that's so interesting. I had no idea that they did that. But the old there's an old joke about, if there's a deer crossing sign right here, why don't the deer just cross right here? And they can't read, right? That's the problem. That's why they don't
right.
cross.
They can't. That's exactly right. Yeah.
So that's one of the things that has come up all week long is this funding, right? CDOT has a different way of funding, and a lot of people don't understand that. Do you mind going into a little bit into depth on how CDOT receives its funding for these projects?
Well, our main source of funding is the gas tax.
Okay.
And so when you fill your tank up, there's a little bit of money from that goes to fund the roads that you drive on. And it's similar in other parts of the state as well too. We have not had a raise in our gas tax since the early 90s. We haven't had any adjustment in our gas tax.
Okay.
So it's kind of like the best way to describe that would be if you didn't have any pay raise since the early 90s.
Sounds horrible.
Your pay just remains stagnant. It remains the same. Mm-hmm. Yet the cost of living goes way up.
Exactly. The cost of repairment.
And then people may argue that point, and they go, oh, okay, well, all right, so your gas tax hasn't gone up, but you got a lot of more people, you have many more people using the road, so that doesn't fly. The thing is, cars have become much more fuel efficient.
Right.
So we have an issue with that too, and we're even looking at other mechanisms, and like a user charge tax. So instead of being taxed based on the gas that you use to use the roads, how much do you use the road? How much mileage do you use when you're traveling on the roads? And then with electric cars and that type of thing, the gas tax just doesn't have the oomph that it used to have. Plus, there hasn't been any kind of adjustment to it in all these years.
Right.
So the combination of that and also the rising cost of materials to build roads. I can tell you the cost of concrete and rebar and steel and all of the things that we have to use to build roads, they haven't stayed at 1991 prices. They have gone up. So when you have something like this and your gas tax is not going up, but yet your cost of building is going up, you run into a situation where you just cannot meet your needs.
Absolutely. We are going to get more into this into the next segment. Stay with us here on Connect and Collaborate. I have Tamara Rollison here from the Colorado Department of Transportation. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Thank you so much for joining us on Connect and Collaborate. I am Alex Hopkins, filling in for Tammy Schaefer, your regular on-air producer. And today I have with me Tamara Rollison. She is the communications manager for the Denver region for the Colorado Department of Transportation. And as I said, all week long we've had CDOT people on, and I am learning so much here. It's more than I ever thought I needed to know about Colorado, but it's been fascinating to say the least. Just awesome things about what goes into the funding and exactly what this, I did not even know that I-25 had a gap. so to speak.
That's right.
Now I know.
Now you know. Now you know why it's called the gap.
Exactly.
Transportation is very interesting because it impacts everybody.
Right.
I remember when I made my career shift into transportation, I thought, oh, that's going to be boring. I'm going to be talking about potholes all the time. And I do talk about potholes quite a lot. But I never realized that I would be going into such a rich field because it truly, everyone's quality of life, whether you drive or not, no matter how old you are, no matter what your background is,
Yeah.
it is the great equalizer, transportation.
Yeah.
And so it's a fascinating field to be in, and it's very, very, very important service that the government offers.
Absolutely. And it's one of I don't want to get this wrong, but it's one of the more poorly funded aspects in government, right? It's not easy.
And just speaking nationally, it has not kept up with the needs, that is for sure.
Yeah.
So when it was built many years ago, many decades ago, it was great,
Right.
but it just hasn't kept up with the explosion of the automobile and vehicles. And so now we're at the situation where we've got an infrastructure that needs repair, infrastructure that needs to be rebuilt, infrastructure that needs to be expanded, widened in some ways. So that's where we are today. And that's one of the reasons why, particularly CDOT's a leader in this area, that we're looking at technology and ways to move more people with fewer vehicles, with connected vehicles, automotive vehicles, that kind of thing, because we believe that's going to be the next phase of transportation.
Yeah. It's we were talking before the break as we were talking about the funding overall.
Right.
But each project has its own set way of getting funding, right?
Well, CDOT in general, we have a annual budget of about $1.4 billion.
Okay.
And that is a lot of money. It sounds like a lot of money.
It sounds like a lot
really
of money.
does. But when you think about all of the things that we have to do, it is spread very, very thin. So we have $1.4 billion, and our main revenue source is the gas tax. And with that $1.4 billion, we maintain 23,000 total lane miles.
Wow. Okay.
So think about that. You could
Yeah.
go back and forth across the country many times with that type of mileage. So with that money, we maintain 23,000 total lane miles, 3,447 bridges.
Yes.
And it handles 27 billion miles are traveled on our roadways. So they're heavily used. And so it's a challenge to keep up. So what does that money go to pay for? It goes to pay for things like potholes,
Yes.
like snow removal, repaving jobs, trash removal, making sure that our bridge structures and our foundations are safe. Very little of that goes to actual expanded capacity, such as a road widening.
Right.
Or a new road, and we really don't build new roads anymore for the most part. Very little of that goes to that type of thing, like what we're doing with the gap. There's just not much of it left over after we take care of everything.
Yeah.
It's like a house. After we fix the roof, and after we replace the windows, and after we pave the driveway and
Yeah.
replace the furnace of an old house, there's just not much left over to build an addition, much less building a brand new house.
Right.
So that's where we are with CDOT. We know what our needs are, and for us to provide what is really needed for the state, we would need about an extra $1 billion a year to do that.
Wow.
So we have $1 billion every year of unmet needs. So we have to be very prudent. We have to be very smart. We have to be very innovative, and we are in how we are investing and spending taxpayer dollars.
Right.
And so when we come to projects like the GAP, we have to look how we're going to get those funding sources. So the way we're able to pay for the GAP, we do have funding sources identified.
Yes.
And thanks to the legislature, they passed something called Senate Bill 267.
Yes.
And so I won't get into the details of how that funding comes to be. It's not like we get a pile of money, and there it is, and we can start.
Yeah.
There are a lot of complexities behind that, but basically from that funding source, that's $250 million.
Okay.
And so
a little bit of that billion, a tiny bit.
$250 million.
Yeah.
That's $250 million. And then our localities have really stepped up, Douglas County and El Paso County. And El Paso County, they have dedicated $15 million. And the PPRTA identified $10 million. And Douglas County also identified $10 million.
Well, big shout out to those guys for helping
Absolutely,
out. Yeah.
absolutely. Because without them, we really do need that local support. That's a lot of money. 250 alone is not going to do it. So then we're getting really close to the $350 million we need to make these improvements to the gap. So the missing piece of this is an application that's been submitted by El Paso County. It's called an infogrant. And so the county has asked for $65 million in federal funds that would go toward improving the gap, to expanding the gap. We are not going to know if we get that funding until the spring.
Okay.
This is very competitive.
Yeah.
It is difficult to get this funding because DOTs across the country are competing for a pot of money that's in this infogrant, and we're one. So it's a very competitive proposal. The federal government is looking for local support, local collaboration. They're looking for innovation. They want to make sure that we are making the absolute best use of the capacity that we have. They do favor express lanes. They do favor innovative forms of moving traffic and congestion management. But we won't know that. But CDOT does have the funds to get the project to construction.
Yeah.
And we will be able to begin construction by the end of next year, pending all of these funding sources. We have a lot of them,
right?
But pending that all the funding sources line up.
Okay, 2 minutes. That is definitely a long way to get to something, but I the collaboration part of it seems very interesting to me. It seems as though we have quite a few cities or counties along the corridor that are willing to step up and help out.
Absolutely. They're very engaged. We have El Paso County. We have Douglas County. Dr. Cog is also involved in this too, because it really is it's a local project. It's a region project. It's a statewide project. It's a national project.
Absolutely.
So it really has far and wide reaching impacts, but obviously the localities are the most impacted, particularly the commuters, and most of the traffic comes from the Monday through Friday traffic comes from Colorado Springs. And even though not very much of the road is in El Paso County, but the people who use it the most, they commute from Colorado Springs to Denver.
Right.
And that has grown. That has grown over the years. We also have something called the bus dang. It's a bus that also helps. And we're hoping with the new improvements to the gap that we will be able to enhance transit. Because I think what is going to evolve and what has had to happen in other major urban areas across the country, it's about moving more people with fewer vehicles.
Right.
Because there comes to a point where the capacity just is not enough to take care of all the vehicles, to move all of the vehicles along.
Wow. Well, one of those things that we're going to touch on in the next segment is express lanes. We've got some controversy surrounding that. So
absolutely.
I'm excited to hear what Tamara Rollins has to say about that. Stay with us here on Connect and Collaborate. We'll be right back. Thank you so much for staying with us here on Connect and Collaborate. I'm Alex Hopkins, taking over for Tammy Schaefer for the day, and I have Tamara Rollison here with me. She is the communications manager for the Denver region for the Colorado Department of Transportation, or CDOT, because we do love our acronyms. And we were just talking about the funding for the I-25 gap project. And one of the things about the funding is that you're trying to get this grant from the federal government. But part of that is that you need to be innovative. And one of the things that they really enjoy and want to participate in are these express lanes.
The federal government is looking for innovation from all DOTs.
Right.
They want to see local support. They want to see local collaboration. They do want to see innovation. They want to see that we're maximizing capacity because they know that roads across the country are, especially our major corridors in urban areas, they're overused. So what are we doing other than just widening a lane to improve traffic? So one of the things that CDOT looked at over the last year is it evaluated about 100 alternatives to what can we do to solve the problem on the I-25 corridor. And so that's what CDOT does in collaboration with localities, Federal Highway Administration, taking in public input. What can we do?
Right.
And so out of that, the public identified 3 needs. It's not just the public, but the analysis that we go through. So the 3 key needs: improve safety, and we've talked about that.
Yes.
We had 1,800 crashes over a couple-year period, so that's a big one. Improve congestion. Every single day, there's one point every single day where the gap is congested. It's particularly bad on the weekends during the summer months.
Okay.
It can be crazy on the gap. That's the heaviest traveled time is during the summer months and on the weekends, and it can be very unpredictable too with crashes.
Yeah.
So we've heard that. So again, safety, reduce congestion or mobility, and a big one is people want a reliable trip. They want to know when they get on the road if they got to catch a plane or something, or if they got to go to work, or if they go to a meeting. They want to know they want a reliable trip, and that's not a given on the gap anymore.
No, it's not.
So what do we do? What do we do with the financing that we have to be able to best meet those needs? And so what CDOT has found, based on experience and analysis, is that an express lane concept could be the solution that would best meet those needs. And so the way that would work is the gap would be widened, 1 lane in each direction, and all 3 lanes would look like new by the time the project would open to traffic. But that extra lane would be an express lane.
Okay.
So one of the things I have to make real clear, because sometimes the public gets confused and they think, oh, well, my gosh, all 3 lanes are going to be toll lanes. No. Panic sort of sets in, and that absolutely is not the case.
Right.
So the 2 lanes that you've been driving on for the last, I don't know how many years, they're free today, they're going to be free tomorrow, they're going to be free. So you're not going to pay a toll ever to ride on those lanes. But the express lane, that additional lane, that will be reserved for people. That's not the right word. What I should say is that you will have the choice to use that express lane if you want to get to your destination faster, in exchange of paying a toll.
Right.
So, for example, there's a crash on I-25. You have got to catch your flight to an important business appointment. You get in that express lane, and if it's during the peak travel times, you'll pay a little bit more. If it's during slower travel times, you'll pay a little bit less. The tolls will be adjusted so that lane can be free-flowing, as congested-free as possible.
Right.
So that meets the need of travel reliability. We have also found with the express lane concept, because we also have express lanes in other parts of the state. We have it US 36 between Denver and Boulder. We have it on I-25 in parts of Denver and north of I-25. We also have the I-70 mountain express lanes. And we have found on those facilities that, and it's you have the choice. You've got your free lanes, but then you can take an express lane to get to your destination faster in exchange for a toll. We have found on those facilities that traffic is flowing better on all 3 lanes, and that's quite significant. And there's some longevity to it. I believe, I'm just looking at my notes here, on US 36, what we have found is that travel has improved by up to more than 20%.
Wow.
We have found on the I-70 mountain corridor, reductions have the congestion has improved by more than up to 50%.
Whoa.
So we have definitely seen some benefits of express lanes in other part of the state. What we've learned, especially in Denver, and especially during the T-Rex project, it was a widening project. We put in some light rail. It was really great. Widened bridges to meet what would be the traffic projections at the time. But traffic grew beyond what anyone could have imagined.
Yeah.
And so now that those extra lanes, at times you don't have a reliable trip on some parts of I-25. So we know we cannot build ourselves out of congestion anymore just by slapping another lane, adding another lane. That's not necessarily going to present the best solution, because we know within time traffic is going to outgrow that.
Right.
So by making that extra lane an express lane, it gives a little bit of flexibility, and it best meets the reliability need more so than just making it what we call the free lanes general purpose lanes, more so than just making them 3 general purpose lanes.
Gotcha.
So that's what we're proposing as we move forward with improving the gap, is making that additional lane an express lane. But the other 2 lanes, the other 2 existing lanes, will continue to be free. It's just that when we have, should they be express lanes, and when we open the road to traffic, I think motorists will find a great deal of relief, because travel will be greatly improved across all lanes, because you'll have the pavement will feel like new, you'll have wider shoulders, and the combination of all of that will be a much better drive for that section of the gap. And you can see it with US 36.
Right. The proof is in the pudding.
Yeah, you can see that. Years ago when I lived here, I used to travel US 36, but I lived in Boulder, I worked in Denver, and I was going back and forth all the time. And even way back when, it was bad. It was just 2 lanes in each direction, and it was a tough road to drive on. But since the improvements have been made to US 36, and you still have the 2 lanes like you did, but you have the express lanes and wider shoulders, it travels much, much better. It's just a world of difference. And the same thing will happen with the gap.
Absolutely. Well, it's one of those, more money, more problems. You just create 3 more lanes, it's going to fill up regardless. So if you make that lane a little bit of cost to the people, they're going to utilize it only when they need to.
Well, you absolutely got it. That is a really important point, because what we have learned with express lanes use, people don't use it every single day.
Right.
Why would they? If traffic is moving along okay, and traffic's going to move along just because of the shoulders are in better shape.
Exactly.
So you wouldn't use it if you don't need to. If traffic is moving well, then there's no need to use it. But if there are some backups on the general purpose lanes, and you really don't have the time to wait in the backups, you've got a ball game you've got to go to. You've got a hospital appointment that you have to meet. There's maybe some inpatient surgery that you have to go to.
Right.
You got to catch a Broncos game.
Yeah.
You've got
very important.
You've got to go to DIA and fly home to see your loved ones. That's when you take that.
Yeah.
And you have a reliable trip. But that's something that we can't provide with just 3 general purpose lanes, and that's what we've learned through experience.
Yeah,
and that's what the analysis shows us as well too.
Absolutely. Just one other question: do you happen to know the funds for that toll? Will that go back into CDOT and help you guys out, or is that?
So that's a good point. I'm glad you asked that question. So how that will work is, we have the funds identified for the actual construction of the $350 million project. But that doesn't include the maintenance, the operations, and the upkeep that will be required after the project. And even though our maintenance funds usually go to help those types of things, they certainly can't cover everything that's needed.
Yeah.
And so those toll revenues will go back into the gap. It's not going to go to another part of the state.
Okay.
It's not going to go to another part of I-25. The funds that are raised from those toll revenues will go back into the gap, benefiting those motorists, all of them, who use the gap. And it could go into things to help offset the costs of maintenance, of operations, and should we make future improvements to the gap,
there you go.
It would go toward that as well, too.
Fantastic. This has been a great conversation. Thank you so much, Tamara Rollison. I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
Rollison, for joining us today. And tune in tomorrow as we cover one last part about this I-25. We're going to talk northbound on I-25 tomorrow. Thank you. We'll see you tomorrow.